Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with machine learning and artificial intelligence in the federal government. With me on today's show are Riley Repko, Strategic Advisor to the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff, U.S. Air Force; Pam Isom, Deputy CIO, Department of Energy; Sanjay Gupta, Chief Technology Officer, Small Business Administration; Ron Butra, Chief Technology Officer, Department of Justice; Henry Sowell, Chief Information Officer, Cloudera Government Solutions; Jim Richburg, Public Sector Chief Information Security Officer at Fortinet; and Alan Jacobson, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Alteryx. We're talking about artificial intelligence. There was an executive order that came out last year, 13859, some guidance behind that. There's been issuance to issue a chief data officer across all the departments and agencies. Lots of data out there, lots of low-cost computing, lots of capability for artificial intelligence and machine learning across the federal government. Let's get right into it, and we'll start with you, Riley. Let's talk about the Air Force. What's happening in regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning across the Air Force?
Hey, good afternoon, Luke, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to be back. If I may, just a quick disclaimer that the views and thoughts and opinions that I'm going to express today are mine, and not necessarily those belonging to the Air Force, where I currently serve. But regarding your question, where the rubber meets the road, our Air Force major areas, of course, include predictive maintenance and logistics, target identification. We have projects in weather. We have a major initiative with the Department of Defense in command and control and global integration of sensors, kind of the IoT for the military. We do a lot of image processing. Of course, most of you have heard of the Maven project. And these are all examples of progress and activities where the Air Force mission has placed significant investment and have seen an improvement. But we have numerous activities that are progressing nicely as well. We're doing a lot of data policy work, not an area that I specialize in, but we also have new senior leadership development courses to educate our leaders in the area of AI and ML. There's a huge commitment by our Air Force leadership to challenging our young airmen to become part of the solution by actively responding to real problems with their innovative ideas. And finally, leveraging our Air Force Accelerator. And this involves incubation to hard problems. And primarily, this is all done with our partnerships with academic institutions. And these include MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Dartmouth, et cetera. And also, we have an organization that's part of the Defense Department called the JAKE, the Joint AI Center. And we do a lot of work collaborating with them. We certainly don't need redundancy of effort, but rather awareness to what's out there, so we're not all chasing the same thing.
And it really is a team effort, right? There's activity at the department with the JAKE, across the academic community, et cetera. It's all hands on deck trying to use this technology, use it in a thoughtful way, in a very strategic way. So I think that's awesome. Pam, how about over at Energy? A lot of activity going on in Energy. I'm sure there's a plethora of use cases for AI and ML that are going on across the energy sector, I would imagine.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk and share some of the insights this morning. I really appreciate it. We all have to start out with some type of disclaimer. So the opinions are my own this morning, but I do represent the Department of Energy at the same time. So if I'm thinking about some of the things that we're doing, we have, as I mentioned the last time I was here, we are still progressing forward with the high performance computing efforts, but now we're moving forward with working with the consortium, the HPC consortium. So a lot of the national labs, as well as the headquarters, are involved with the consortium type of efforts, where we are teaming with industry and academia and building and solving challenges that involve the use of AI, ML, and cognitive science as a whole. If I think about something specifically, I think about COVID. So our teams have, from headquarters, my organization has built an app that provides a lot of capability around case management and tracking the COVID cases. So it's highly confidential. At the same time, it is an application that we've built to help manage the situation in our environment. Along with that is the cases and the applications that we've built working in the consortium effort to really conduct molecular diagnosis and preventive type of activity so that we can do things to address the pandemic, but also head it off before another one approaches us. So there is a lot of work in that space that we're really proud of, because we know that the pandemic that we're under now and the need for crisis management, all of that, there's a ton of data, there's a lot of research that needs to happen. There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of forecasting that needs to happen. And we can't do it without the use of AI, ML, cognitive science as a whole, and also natural language processing. So we are very excited about that effort.
This recent situation has really brought to the forefront a variety of use cases for this type of technology, which is certainly timely. Sanjay, how about over at SBA? I know you've all have been right in the middle of a lot of activity going on over there. Give us a top line on what's going on in regards to AI and ML and small business administration.
Sure. Thank you for having me back here, Luke. Glad to be back. I'd like to start first with sharing just a quick concept around AI ML. And I think it's an important concept. What I call is simply there are two kind of camps of people that use AI ML, creators and consumers. And the reason I want to bring this distinction is because for the most part, like in the technology world, most of us are consumers of artificial intelligence or machine learning. And why I bring that up is there's only probably a very small proportion of the users who are creators of the algorithms and the other things that go behind AI and ML. Clearly, we at the SBA are in the consumer category. We're not writing algorithms. And I think there'll be a distinction that becomes more clear as we continue the panel discussion. So from our standpoint at the SBA, we have been using ML mostly, I would say less of AI, but mostly in the machine learning category for the over probably 2.5 years now. And I'll give a little quick overview of those activities that are going on. The two that I want to quickly talk about are ones that we introduced in the last 100 days, obviously with the pandemic response, and one we had in place around cybersecurity, around anomaly detection for almost 2.5 years. And I've talked about this on your show previously as well. So let me give you a quick overview. Obviously, a lot of people know about the Small Business Administration's role in the pandemic response. So we had a lot of applications and loan applications and customer service inquiries that came by as a result of that. And so one of the things we were grappling with was receiving a lot of applications as PDFs or images or other forms of documents. And we needed a way to process these documents quickly, obviously, extract the data from them, and make it available in a structured forum so that the rest of the workflow could use them. And so we used cloud-based machine learning solutions to be able to process a large number of the applications and supporting documents for loans primarily, and be able to use that. The second use case I will probably want to quickly cover as well is customer service inquiries that we were receiving. Obviously, that volume went up significantly high. And so we implemented, again, cloud-based sentiment analysis capabilities on our incoming email. And that allowed us to see what was happening in terms of customer sentiment, in terms of trends, and be able to use that information to inform how we would update our frequently asked questions, how did we need to make adjustments to our programs, and be able to get a pulse of the consumer or the customers as well. The third use case that I want to talk briefly about is around the cybersecurity domain, and this is around anomaly detection. And what we do in this case is the fact that I'll give a couple examples just to illustrate what that means. For example, let's say I logged in the United States, Washington, D.C. office, say at 8 a.m. Eastern time this morning. And let's say my login ID was used at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and it shows that it's coming from Los Angeles, California. Obviously, I could not be in 30 minutes in Washington, D.C., and be in Los Angeles. So clearly, there's probably some need to review this situation and see if this was indeed true. It's called as an improbable travel alert. So this is just a very simple illustration of how we are using some built-in capabilities, which is around machine learning, where a user profile is created over a period of time and to do some anomaly detection. So anyways, we'll talk more about this, but those are sort of a few examples that we are using at the SBA right now.
Lots of great use cases going on over there at SBA. Ron, how about at Department of Justice? I know that you're working across the department and agency, sort of at the interagency level on a lot of this activity. Give us a state of the state as to what's going on there.
Yeah, first off, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see a lot of friends and familiar faces here. So I think one of the really interesting things that you've heard from these different agencies is there is no universal definition for AI. And I think that a lot of people are struggling for what does it really mean when people start talking about artificial intelligence versus cognitive computing versus machine learning. What is deep learning? And there's a lot of words out there. One thing that I think we all as a community need to understand is this is something that's been around for some time, which, a lot of these thoughts and these techniques started in the 50s. And what we've seen over time is that the neural nets have been in place for 20 years. And today, really because of the advances in computing, in data access, and the amount of storage we have, the ability to really process that data at a much higher rate, we are allowed to do the types of techniques that we weren't able to 20 years ago when I was in college playing with neural nets. So one of the things that, as the co-chair from the CIO Council's Innovation Committee, we have done a number of things to try and spread the messages and make sure that we're building upon the executive orders and a lot of the good work from across the government. And that's included in having a number of roundtables and where we've had really thought-provoking conversations on data science and AI, the impact to the workforce, which is, there's a lot of people who are concerned about what this means, and really about sharing out successful use cases across the entire government. In addition, there's a lot of really good work that's happening that we can leverage across the government, not just learning from the good successes that you're hearing about. I mean, and honestly, you've got three forward-leaning organizations with me on this call today. And then in addition, think about the good work that we're seeing out of NIST and the AI community of practice that we're seeing out of GSA, and that's sponsored by the CIO Council. There's a lot of good resources that are coming across the government, and part of this is just making sure that there's a good set of messages and the connectivity tissue that is needed to make sure that everyone can accelerate with this new technology.
And everyone learning from each other, right? As we go on this journey about the use of this technology and making sure that we have good policies, make sure the policies are working, et cetera. So I'm really pleased to see that the community is coming together and sharing information so that we can further this movement. Henry, over at Cloudera, tell us about Cloudera, what Cloudera is doing, and how they're helping the federal community enable this capability.
Well, Luke, thank you for having me on. So there's actually been a lot of interesting things that we've been working with our government partners here at Cloudera, a number of different use cases. And I really, I liked Sanjay's comments on creators and consumers. And some of the things that I think we forget is a part of leveraging ML. There's a full data lifecycle that you're working with, whether it's from data collection, data engineering, before you ever get to machine learning. And then what do you do once you have done that? Then you have to actually serve it to somebody and have consumers that can leverage it, right? It's this production process of how do you get from one end to another. And so we have here at Cloudera, we've been involved in a lot of that process. Is what does it look like getting through that full life cycle? We're working with a number of partners. Everything from helping to increase crop yields in farming to predictive maintenance in the Department of Defense. I think that's been a really significant use case in helping to keep more vehicles in working forward, moving forward. Then I think the other really interesting use case is around cybersecurity. So Sanjay was hitting on this. And we've been working with a number of different customers, and really is to being able to operate at scale and to detect anomalies, right? So we have some partners where they're processing 1 billion network events a day, right? And how do you process that significant material, right? Your standard SOC can't process the number of alerts that come through that may be of concern, right? And so leveraging machine learning can help identify things that are of real interest, things that are anomalous, where we can profile an entire workforce to say that, hey, here's the expected activity, but then what falls outside of those bounds. So it's been really diverse, the number of machine learning use cases that we've seen. I think the one thing that we've seen, and I'll probably talk about it later in this, is the increased effectiveness of machine learning, getting it from not just a science project but to actually having real production use out in the government space. I think we're seeing that evolution, and we're starting to see more and more effectiveness of machine learning in the government space.
Much more accuracy and taking some of that labor off the table, sort of that, finding that needle on a stack of needles. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? How do they sort of fit into this? Where do they sort of come together in enabling this capability?
Thank you, Luke. It's good to be back on the program. I want to build on the comments both of Sanjay and of Henry. Fortinet is a full spectrum cybersecurity company. We started 20 years ago with firewalls, but now we're active at the edge, the endpoint, the core, the cloud. So when we talk about the diversity of the attack surface, an OEM like us is actively instrumenting all of that. So we tend to see globally 100 billion with a B pieces of security event data a day. The only way to make sense of a torrent of data like that is with AI and ML. And not only, as Henry said, to make sense of it, to be able to respond to it, but a big company like ours would also be a producer of capability as well, because in order to generate signatures, to actually come up with something that you want to alert on and that you need to put back into the instrumentation to respond to, you use AI and ML. I mean, it's now by exception that a human generates the signature. It's now been basically fully automated thanks to AI and ML. So I think the point to make is, if you are a big cybersecurity company that's playing across that attack surface, AI and ML is really a core capability of your business. You can't deal with that growing, exponentially growing torrent of data unless you've automated the big data analytics.
No doubt about it, and quite honestly, a lot of these tools and capabilities that these agencies are buying have AI and ML incorporated in that. And I'm sure we'll talk all about that, but right now we're going to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on the Federal News Network. We're talking about AI and ML, and we were just getting into sort of just the top line activities about what's happening across the departments and agencies. And Alan, going to throw it over to you. Just give us a top line on what's happening in regards to Alteryx and how do you all fit into this ecosystem?
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be here. So, at Alteryx, we're really about enabling everyone to jump into this AI and ML pool. And I'm really seeing this trend, and a couple of the panelists referred to it. The diversity of analytics is really increasing dramatically. We're starting to see it in every area of government, from local to state to federal. We're seeing it in every area of the government's mission, in every department. Pamela talked about the pandemic response as an example and a use case there. And I mean, if I look at the diversity of use cases that are happening just around COVID-19, from exploring potential drugs to monitoring metrics and seeing what cases are looking like, predicting hospital loads, HR analytics, looking at where employees are located. Did some work with the USDA. Where are all of their field offices, and what level of risk is each one of the offices in relative to COVID outbreak? And so, you look at that across the full spectrum of all the agencies and all the different missions and all the different departments. The really exciting thing is the diversity of those use cases. When I look back in time, maybe the avian flu outbreak, Alteryx was used with the CDC and helping to speed up the response to that. But there were maybe a handful of use cases now the diversity of use cases is incredible. It's hard to keep up. And in Alteryx, that's what we're really about, is enabling everyone to be able to attack these problems using AI and ML.
Right, and you capstone several different activities that are going on across the departments and agencies. And Pam, you brought up a couple of really interesting ones, certainly timely. Can you give us a specific example of a project that you all are working on that's really helping to enable your agency's mission?
So one is the effort that we have to manage and track all the AI initiatives within the department. We needed to do a better job of portfolio management and really knowing what's going on within the department as well as what's lined up. So we literally are looking at what should we be doing next based on the data that we have. And then across the federal government, they continually ask, what are we doing in certain areas? What are the data sets, right? What is the inventory? And so we have, it seems like a fundamental activity, but we know today, for instance, that we have over 600 AI initiatives going on, and we know about how much we're spending on those initiatives. And we know the progression that we're making towards tangible outcomes. So that's one example. The other example that I wanted to share, though, is the humanitarian assistance. So by me being the senior agency official for geospatial information, I am fortunate enough to work a lot with the what's going on around the world and get more involved with that type of data and data analytics. Mm-hmm. And so the humanitarian assistance work, for instance, we're working with the first responders to help them to understand the perimeters of the fires. So for instance, before the wildfires break out, is there a potential that this is going to happen? And after they have transpired, what's the likelihood of the wildfire expanding? And then where are the other pockets? Are there hot pockets within the area? We also are looking at building damages and any type of damage assessments. Is there road obstructions that have transpired? So I'm fortunate enough to be able to work on these types of initiatives, which is all about data. So we're at this point, we're looking at imagery analytics and computer visioning, things like that, that absolutely requires the use of cognitive science and intelligence and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and I can't exclude natural language processing. We need all of those capabilities to really generate outcomes that really matter to the world. And that's what I'm most excited about and that's what I'm talking about today mostly, is the things that we're doing that I know we're making a difference in the world, and we're helping our first responders. And with the pandemic and all of that, those are all things that are so important. Everything is important, right? The mission with the federal government is important, but I'm just pointing out a couple of significant undertakings that we are advancing and moving forward, because we're trying to help make the world a better place and save some lives.
And you certainly are. And if you think about the pandemic as an obvious one, the fires was another one, and geospatial, et cetera, that is bushels and bushels of data that has to be processed at, light speed. So I'm sure that's it's just fantastic the way this technology is allowing you all to make great informed decisions. Henry, how about over at Cloudera? Can you give us an example of a specific program that you've been able to help an agency work on to further their mission?
Yeah, I think one is really around, that's interesting, is working with a number of governments around national statistics. So think of U.S. Census Bureau and other countries' national statistics organizations. And what's interesting about these organizations is they're often some of the largest employers of data scientists, collecting vast amounts of information around their populations. And one of the great parts about it is that they're using machine learning to help predict things like economic activity, using their data sets to understand a clear view of how their economy is growing, shrinking, changing, and doing it in real time. And the same thing goes with how they're leveraging that data to understand their constituents. What is the movement of their population? Where do they need to make greater investments? How does that affect policy changes at the federal and state and local levels? And I think that's been an incredibly interesting set of use cases that Cloudera has been directly involved with in helping to make successful.
It really is incredible when you think about the rich capability and just the broad swath of ways that you can use this type of technology. Sanjay, we've heard a lot about activity over at SBA these days, and you gave us a great tutorial there, if you will, on sort of, consumers versus folks that are actually creating. Tell us about a specific project area that you might want to unpack for us and just sort of take us through that.
Sure. Thank you, Luke. And then I'll talk about the customer service hub. And so let me give a little quick context around it. Like most organizations at the SBA, we are receiving customer inquiries coming in through email channels. Obviously, we were flooded with those customer inquiries. And so we quickly implemented a case management system. So we took these emails coming in an automated manner, and then we created cases based on each email. And the one that I want to talk specifically about is using natural language processing and to do specifically sentiment analysis for these inbound emails. And that allowed us to sort of get a real-time or near real-time pulse of the customer sentiments in relation to the two major flagship programs, the PPP program and the EIDL program, the two loan programs that the SBA was chartered with. And that gave us a sense of what we needed to change from our frequently asked questions, what we needed to make changes in terms of customer service response, and how would the program maybe needed some tweaking as well. So I think this is one of the most important ones that I'll say is certainly customer facing. And obviously for us at the SBA, customer experience and improving customer experience has been at the forefront. And so this is example I specifically chose for the case that it helps you and the audience understand how we used machine learning in this case to help improve the customer services and the customer experiences in a difficult and a trying time. There's probably more examples I can obviously talk about, but certainly this comes to mind as the forefront.
That certainly is fascinating, where you're able to read that and sort of get a pulse of the sort of the voice of the customer, if you will.
Exactly.
And be able to adjust accordingly. I think that's fascinating. Alan, how about over there at Alteryx in regards to a specific project, a specific effort that you've been involved in to help further an agency mission?
Yeah, so I will say this is a hard question. It's like picking your favorite child, right? So many phenomenal use cases that we see across really almost all the agencies. But one that comes to mind, as hurricane season approaches, I think back to just a really great use case with FEMA and Homeland Security, where after Maria and Irma hit, there were well over 100,000 structures that were damaged. And the historic process is, engineers have to assess those structures, figure out the level of damage to those structures to figure out how to rebuild. And, obviously the faster that gets done, the faster recovery can begin and life can get back to normal. But when you have 100,000 structures spread across a couple Caribbean islands, this is is quite a task. Using a traditional process of going and assessing each one with engineers and spending hours at every structure, this could have been a decade to assess all of these structures. And so armed with Alteryx and laptop computers, data from dozen sources, from satellite weather data to information about tides and flooding, the team was able to create models on the fly, basically. Take sample data, create models, and assess structural damage of these structures to quickly be able to assess which ones were under the threshold of a 50% damage, which ones were over, which ones actually needed the assessment by humans, speeding the recovery just dramatic amounts. And when I look at the impact that had on the lives of all of those people, to be able to get back onto the road to recovery, it's just a massive impact. And then the spillover, now having a process that you can respond to future disasters and do it efficiently. I think of examples like that. And again, I'm seeing these sorts of examples all over the place, but what a great use of technology, a great use of data to really impact people's life. And, again, that's what makes us really excited at Alteryx, is to be able to enable people to do things exactly like that.
And at a time when they desperately need it, certainly, and
Absolutely.
when there's a lot of chaos out there, right? And things have to happen very quickly. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, et cetera. Riley, how about at the Air Force? I think about satellites. I think about embedded systems. You talked about the Jake. There's got to be a whole lot of activity there. Give us one example of where this technology is being used to sort of further the mission of the Air Force.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I mean, part of what I need to do is kind of set the stage, however. The Air Force does have several of these AI teams, that house our specialists that are working this dark art in all kinds of areas. But first, there's a huge value, as you can appreciate, in attracting the right talent. Now, we see very quick results from, our Boston Accelerator, Kessel Run, that, leverages all this partnering with learned and vetted cutting edge companies, with academia, in fact, even with the companies that are on this panel today, as well as with our allies and partners. And this is a real key motivator, because they're working, very specific and hard problems. But, all due respect to those smart developers that, that are living in their mom's basement with their blue hair, tats, earrings, and never kissed a girl, we want this talent in our court. I make this point because the stakes are much higher in the military, because in many cases, we're working around issues that involve putting lives at risk. So if I was to look at the Air Force Research Lab, they have this autonomy collaboration team 3, Act 3. And they have a group of ninjas there that develop an AI platform. So let me give a shout out to, Dr. Cap Rogers. He's developing an operational capability that kind of brings issues or brings experience to the last mile of military applications. So, having the ability to verify and validate techniques for military purposes requires expertise beyond just algorithm development. We have to have an understanding of what the outputs and development concepts, we're going to be able to expect. Google and Facebook publish all kinds of algorithms of trained instances, TensorFlow is an example. It's fine to start with this, but we must be able to train to military applications. You simply can't start with an algorithm that identifies cats or puppies and apply it to finding tanks. So just to show the diversity of our projects, we have developed business processes, prototyped for solving problems in strategy planning, programming, budgeting, and our execution process. This is a very mundane, error-prone area, but it has allowed the Air Force to propose 3 times more planning choices in seconds, not weeks, for the same cost.
Yeah, I would say that the diversity in regards to how one would approach this capability is certainly significant. And being that the Air Force has a lot of diversity there, I think it's great that the way they're approaching that and doing it very aggressively, I might add. Jim, how about at Fortinet? Tell us about a specific project that you've been able to work on that's been able to further the mission of one of these agencies across the departments and agencies?
Luke, I've talked about how powerful AI and ML are for cybersecurity, but I recognize that there are a large number of federal networks where neither the data nor even the telemetry about the data can be allowed to go off premise or out of the network. So how do you do cybersecurity and leverage AI and ML for those cases without telling the customer, to use Sanjay's example, either build it yourself or you're out of luck? And Fortinet has been using AI and ML in production for security for 10 years. Not only has it gotten more powerful, but the corollary to that is the algorithms have gotten more efficient. And this year, we actually reached the point where we were able to deploy freestanding software-based versions of this, so that if you can't bring the data to the AI, you can send the AI to the data center or potentially even to the endpoints in the federal network. And these are not lightweight software appliances. These are full deep neural networks, 4-layer deep neural networks, so they can deal with fairly complex operating environments. And the studies have shown that within about 12 or 13 weeks, one of those deployments can be producing as much alerting as 3 or 4 full-time SOC analysts are. So that's a way of saying you can take this kind of capability and you can give it to federal customers to use in their own environment where they've got to be able to take care of themselves. They can't rely on external customers who need to export the data to handle it. So that's a very powerful capability that's just come online for us this year. And we're excited to be working with federal partners on that.
Are you able to implement something like that very quickly in regards to the departments and the agencies? Are they embracing that sort of wholeheartedly, if you will?
It just started coming online as a capability at the same time COVID hit. So we haven't been able to have a close dialogue with a lot of our typical federal channels to be able to say, here's a capability, do you want to start deploying it inside your network? But this is a full standalone commercial product. We call it, a virtual security analyst, but again, it's really a very powerful AI tool. So this is something that is now with us that I think will find federal partners more interested in using, because it gives them full control over the data with the power of these fully mature data analytics.
Interesting that you're able to take something that's been sort of hardened in the commercial environment, now port it over. I love that story. That sounds great. Well, we're going to take another short break and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on the Federal News Network. And welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about AI and ML, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Ron, at Department of Justice. What are you guys up to over there? What are you working on right now? Give us an example of a specific program that you're working on that's really lighting it up there at Department of Justice.
I think from the standpoint, you've heard some great use cases, and obviously within the department, we are exploring the use of AI in a number of tools, from tools that we're buying and what are the commercial impacts of using the AI, and what is also being used within our cybersecurity realm in these tools. I think you're hearing a lot of good use cases. But one thing I wanted to add a little color on is how accessible AI has become to our developers. So as a personal example, just to sort of humanize this a little bit, my oldest son's at Penn State University, and he's an undergraduate, and he's doing computer vision. So I'm thinking back when I was doing my senior projects, I actually worked on neural nets, and I was trying to build out some algorithms, and that was 20 years ago. And here he is working on computer vision. It fits on his laptop. It's a couple hundred lines of dense Python code, and he's getting efficacy rates of better than 96%. Now the training, because it's on a laptop, it takes a little over 4 hours, but it's pretty astounding what is at the fingertips of our developers today. I think a lot of people today are looking at AI as something that is big and unapproachable, and this is something we have to be thinking about when the students and the developers that are driving a lot of our innovation really have it at their fingertips. So I'll just leave it at, I really think we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that people understand how accessible, what this really means, really to the broad community.
I mean, it is remarkable, the compute capability that's available to any college student, right? Any high school student, the data that's available, right? And the ability to merge those things together is just unbelievable with these new languages now is just fascinating what's happening there. All right, we're going to talk about priorities and want to talk about top priorities for the coming year. And Sanjay, let's start with you. Tell us a lot of activity going on at SBA. You got a lot of things on the deck right now. I'm sure you've got a lot of things for top priorities that you're looking at.
Sure. So highest level priority obviously is improving customer experience. That continues to be the SBA's focus and our focus at the technologists, if you will, supporting SBA's mission. Cybersecurity is number 2, and I know I won't go into a lot of details around that. I know some of my colleagues talked about it, about how AI and ML is enabling a more secure environment for us. The one thing that I would say is we are also looking at increasing the use of ML and AI for fraud detection, if you will. That's something which, when you're processing large volume of applications, that becomes, if you will, more available and handy in being able to do some automation there. And I talked about how we are using AI and ML in being able to process applications faster. So improving our customer response times, kind of the major recurring theme is around improving our customer experience. And we continue to do that, and we're looking for opportunities in that. The one last thing I'd say is that across the board, even within the 3 use cases I talked about, and some of my colleagues here on the panel have mentioned that, some use cases we had to spend an incredibly amount of time in training the algorithms, for instance, extraction of structured data from PDFs. But in the other use cases where AI ML is embedded, like the example of anomaly detection in the cybersecurity tools that I talked about earlier, that was almost just turn it on and start seeing the alerts that are coming on, fine tune it a bit, and you're ready to consume it. So we're seeing a broad spectrum across the board.
Really cool. I see work going on the back end, work going on the front end with the customer experience. That's fascinating. I'm really pleased to see that. Pam, how about over at Department of Energy? Top priority for next year or this year?
So one of the top priorities is the workforce and talent management. So we've got to get the workforce to the place where we better understand how to test the AI and ML solutions that are either made available to us or those that we are building. So we need to better understand how to secure the data, for instance, that we're using to train the models with. How do we put together a good risk management program for managing the assets as a whole, for instance, the models, the algorithms. So we are very focused on that. And then I just want for my staff in particular, I really want us to, we really embrace AI, we really embrace risk management, but we really need to get in there and better understand what that means and what is acceptable. What is an acceptable risk level, right? If I am looking to provide some insights pertaining to health, right? Is it acceptable that the variance is 1%, right? Does it have to be 100% precise? So we want to dig deeper into understanding that area of risk management and how to test and quality assure the products and services. And that is really through my Innovation Community Center that I have in my office. Yeah. That is something that we are really focused on, is how do we go about this? Because that is the very next step, considering data, considering hypotheses, considering the fact that we are dependent on the AI outcomes. When I do a search, for instance, what's the probability that the search results are exactly what I need and how do I use the search results? So it goes a little bit deeper than the surface type of stuff, but if I can get the workforce thinking about these things, we're ahead of the curve, but it's something that we absolutely need, and we're making that happen through our through the Innovation Community Center.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. All right. So we're going to wrap it up here, and we're going to ask all the panel members about sort of what does the future look like. We're going to start with you, Alan, at Alteryx. You know, what's it look like going forward? What's it look like over the horizon?
Yeah, so, Ron mentioned his story about someone with a technical background, his son learning, vision systems in school and being able to do it lightning fast. And what we see now happening is this is spreading. You've got accountants basically now doing the same thing in their education program. And what we're really focused on is bringing these leading edge technologies, AI and ML, to everyone. So in every area of the organization, at every level of the organization, people can go on this journey, whether it's the NLP, sentiment analysis type stuff, being able to do it drag and drop, or advanced modeling, really making it easy and guiding people along that journey.
So many incredible use cases. Jim, how about over at Fortinet?
So Luke, it's easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees. We've been talking about a lot of really exciting tree level things in AI and ML on this panel. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it's something that is going to fundamentally transform the way it's done. We're coming to a tipping point where we're going to take the advantage away from the offense, from the attacker, because they're not perfect, they're not invisible. And if finally AI and ML allows you to say, I see them trying, I see them failing, I can divine their intent. And while patient zero, to use the pandemic metaphor, is still battling an infection, I'm inoculating everybody else. That is transformational. And that's actually where AI and ML are driving us in the cybersecurity business. So my recommendation to a federal customer is there are only half a dozen of these big platform-based ecosystems out there. Pick one. Don't end up accidentally making procurements from 3 major ones, because you're not getting defense in depth, you're leaving synergy on the cutting room floor.
Pick one and drive it home. Good advice. Henry, how about at Cloudera? What's it look like over the horizon for you all?
Thanks, Luke. So I think just to say it quickly, there was a survey done last year, only 35% of algorithm work was actually making it to production, right? The things that we think about are how do we productionize ML and AI? How do you do things like where we're getting ML into everybody's hands, but we're also understanding how to secure it, how to govern it. How do you know where data came from, how it was changed, and how is it going to be implemented in the past, right? So that we can actually put these things into production. And having a platform like Cloudera that allows you to do that full life cycle from data collection all the way to ML, and allowing it to make it into production more quickly. I think that's where the future is making these things not science projects, but making them effective production use cases.
Sort of real use, and we've heard some of that real use, sort of real-time use cases that are being widely adopted, which is fantastic. Ron, what's the future look like? If we sort of look over the horizon here in the next 2 years, what can we expect across the Department of Justice?
So I think, and I'm going to put on the my co-chair from the Innovation Committee that hat from a federal wide. If you start thinking about how fast AI and ML is being adopted across the technology world, we really need to be thinking about a good understanding from a governance perspective, a broad understanding of what does it take to build, when you should be building AI versus buying AI versus understanding what the controls you need to have in place of AI in your everyday products. And I think that if you flash forward a couple years from now, we're going to have to make significant coordination and efforts to make sure that we have the right governance in place to ensure we have the controls, the cybersecurity, the privacy, and honestly, that AI aligns to American values when we have a human in the loop, and eventually for when we don't have a human in the loop. And it's going to take a lot of effort and coordination across the entire federal ecosystem.
Really is a delicate balance there, right? When you're looking at, when you get to the point where, perhaps you don't need a human in the loop, so to speak, making sure that you're doing that in a thoughtful and respectful way is going to be super important. Sanjay, how about over at SBA? What does it look like if I'm going to go apply for a loan in 2 years? What kind of an experience am I going to have compared to what I have today? Which today is awesome,
Excellent.
by the way. So I don't know if it can get any better, right?
I think it can definitely get better, Luke, actually.
Mhm.
Reducing the time it takes to respond to our customer inquiries, whether it's loan applications, certification programs, or whatever services that we are providing to the citizens and the consumers. And certainly this is where I see the use of AI and ML to help us reduce the time it takes us to service. So in essence, again, the recurring theme is improving customer experiences. Number two, I would say, is improving our workforce from moving them into a more higher value added work as opposed to the lower value added work that they are currently doing by automating things or using ML. And I talked about those examples like extracting data from, structured data from PDF documents as an example. And number three, I would say, is improving our cybersecurity posture by use of AI and ML tools. So those are the three things I would say I would see in the next 2 to 3 years for the SBA.
And all of those you're doing to some degree now. I would
Exactly
imagine
correct.
in a more realized, more mature, more in-depth way over the next couple of years, which will, of course, increase the customer experience, et cetera. Pam, how about at Department of Energy? If we look at sort of the way you guys are operating in respect to wildfires, which people might not even have thought about that, right? It's a very interesting scenario you brought up, or the COVID stuff. What can we expect in a couple of years?
I would say more of the collective impact partnerships. That's what we call it, consortium style activity, where we're bringing groups of people together to collectively think about the solutions to problems. And then I want to say cognitive information agents. So when I model my business today, when I model my organization, and what's the most effective from an operations perspective, what should my business model look like? What are the core capabilities and competencies that I need? I don't want to have to do that. I want AI. I want to be able to run an algorithm or run a model, and it tells me how my organization, what are the recommendations? How should my organization be optimized? What are some of the operational models that we should consider? I don't really want to spend, I think about the financial services and things like that. And when I'm looking at my investments and my portfolio, I run tools that help me plan. I would rather see more AI built into how we run our business, how we drive customer experiences, and things like that, rather than me taking the time to do so and then bring in the human aspect of this to just validate what's going on and apply proof of concepts, things like that. So that's what I'm looking at, is for AI to give me more intelligence and how to run my organization more efficiently.
Right, really extract yourself from some of that sort of daily grind and get into this higher order, sort of higher value, similar to what Sanjay was saying, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Riley, how about over at the Air Force? A lot of activity going on over there. If we sort of looked over the horizon, I'm a new airman coming into the Air Force. What can I expect?
Well, Luke, my belief is that the Air Force will continue our commitment to leverage our airmen and their innovation, basically to see and deliver on what the art of the possible, actually is. We certainly, as Pam mentioned, will see these formalized connections to capabilities with seamless cross-service collaboration. And this will include with our allies, with our industry partners, with academia, and with the venture capital community. Having this advanced, I call it advanced situational awareness to the capabilities and capacities that are out there will only enable our Air Force investments in all the domains that we reside in today.
Fantastic. And I want to mention not only airmen, but of course airwomen who are out there fighting the good fight on behalf of all of us and protecting this nation. So I want to thank all of you, first of all, for taking your time out of your busy schedule today to participate on this panel. I'd like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience, for tuning in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.